The night was not just dark. It was a living, breathing entity. A thick velvet blanket of shadows had descended upon the small, ancient village nestled deep within the valley. The sky, completely devoid of stars, had opened up, releasing a steady, rhythmic rain.
It was the kind of rain that speaks to the soul, a continuous, mesmerizing hum of water washing over the stone-paved streets, drumming against the wooden eaves, and cascading into the unseen forest streams below. There were no moonbeams to guide the way.
The heavy clouds had swallowed all natural light. The world was reduced to the immediate sounds of the storm and the chilling dampness of the midnight air. Through this impenetrable darkness, a solitary traveler was making his way.
He was far from home, wrapped tightly in a thick woolen cloak that was now heavy with the cold rain. His boots sloshed through the puddles that had pooled in the uneven cobblestones. Every step was a calculated risk.
He moved with agonizing slowness, his hands occasionally grazing the rough, damp brick walls of the houses just to keep his balance. He was exhausted. The darkness was disorienting, pressing in on him from all sides. He could not see his own hands in front of his face. He felt entirely alone in a world entirely submerged in water and shadow. Just as the traveler felt he could go no further, just as the chill began to seep into his very bones, something shifted in the atmosphere. Far down the narrow, winding alleyway, a faint glow appeared.
At first, it was nothing more than a hazy speck, a fragile pinpoint of warmth struggling against the misty downpour. But as the seconds ticked by, the light grew steadier. It was a rich golden amber, a solitary lantern cutting through the heavy fog and the relentless rain.
The traveler stopped, letting out a long, shaky breath of relief. Finally, another living soul. Finally, a source of light. He leaned against the wet brick wall, waiting for the figure to approach.
As the glowing halo drew nearer, the raindrops illuminated by the lantern looked like falling sparks of liquid gold. The soft ambient light began to reveal the silhouette of the person carrying it. It was an older man, dressed in a simple dark tunic. He walked with an incredibly slow, measured rhythm. In his left hand, he held the lantern high, its warm light washing over his serene, weathered face. In his right hand, he held a long, polished wooden cane, which he used to gently tap the stones ahead of him. Tap, tap, tap. As the man stepped into the traveler's immediate view, the traveler noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The older man's eyes were completely still. They were clouded, gazing straight ahead into the void, completely unresponsive to the bright, flickering flame just inches away from his face. The man carrying the light was completely blind. The traveler stood frozen, utterly bewildered. He watched as the blind man masterfully navigated a deep puddle, guided only by the feeling of the cane and the echo of the rain. Unable to contain his overwhelming curiosity, the traveler stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," the traveler called out. His voice was raspy from the cold, barely rising above the sound of the downpour. The blind man stopped immediately. He did not turn his eyes, but he tilted his head slightly, tuning his ears to the exact location of the traveler's voice. A warm, peaceful smile spread across his face, entirely undisturbed by the freezing rain. "Good evening, traveler," the blind man replied. His voice was deep, resonant, and incredibly soothing, like the calm center of the storm. "It is a treacherous night to be walking these streets alone." The traveler took a step closer,
the golden light of the lantern now warming his own cold face. "It is," the traveler agreed. "But if you will forgive my intrusion, I must ask you a question that is deeply confusing me." "Ask what you wish, my friend," the blind man said gently.
The traveler looked at the lantern, then back at the man's unseeing eyes. "You are blind, sir. You cannot see the light this flame casts. You cannot see the cobblestones, the puddles, or the walls around us. The darkest midnight and the brightest noon are exactly the same to you. So, why do you burden yourself by carrying a heavy lantern through this storm?" The blind man stood quietly for a moment, letting the rain wash over his shoulders. He let out a soft, low chuckle that seemed to harmonize perfectly with the falling water.
He adjusted his grip on the iron ring of the lantern, holding it slightly higher between them. "You are incredibly observant, and you are entirely correct," the blind man said, his tone patient and kind. "I do not carry this lantern for myself. I have walked these village streets since I was a small boy. I know every curve of the brick, every dip in the stone. I do not need the light to find my way home." "Then why?" the traveler whispered, genuinely captivated. The blind man turned his face toward the traveler. Though his eyes could not see, his presence felt deeply piercing. "I carry this lantern for you," the blind man said simply. "For me?" the traveler asked, taken aback. "For you and for anyone else who has the gift of sight," the blind man continued, his voice steady against the wind. "This storm is blinding. The darkness tonight is heavy enough to confuse even the sharpest eyes. If I were to walk out here in the pitch black, someone rushing through the alley, someone like you, trying to find their way to a warm fire, might not see me." The blind man gently tapped his cane on the stone. "You would bump into me. We would both fall onto the hard, cold stones. We would both be hurt. By carrying this light, I am not illuminating my own path. I am giving you the light to see me. I am protecting you from stumbling in the dark. And in doing so, I am protecting myself." The traveler was rendered entirely speechless. The chill of the night seemed to vanish, replaced by a profound, warming realization that bloomed in his chest. He stared at the blind man, looking past the physical lantern and seeing the immense, radiant empathy that the man carried within his soul. The traveler realized how often he walked through his own life, thinking only of his own path, his own struggles, and his own destination. He had been so focused on his own darkness that he had never considered lighting a flame for someone else. The blind man's wisdom was a quiet revolution. It was the understanding that our lives are deeply, invisibly tethered to the lives of everyone around us. When we take a moment to make the path safer for others, we are, inevitably, paving a smoother road for ourselves. "Thank you," the traveler finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me far more than just light to see the road tonight." The blind man smiled, a deep, knowing expression. He gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "Safe travels, my friend. May you always find the light when you need it, and may you always be the light when others cannot see." The blind man turned and continued his slow, rhythmic march down the cobblestone alley. The traveler stood perfectly still, watching as the golden halo of the lantern drifted further and further away, shrinking back into a tiny, fragile speck of light, until it was finally swallowed by the mist and the shadows. But the darkness no longer felt oppressive to the traveler. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself and took a step forward. He could still hear the rain, he could still feel the cold, but his mind was at absolute peace. He walked the rest of his journey with a steady heart, guided by the unseen, lingering warmth of a blind man's beautiful soul. The traveler was profoundly moved by the blind man's quiet wisdom. He realized that the lantern was not just a tool for sight, but a profound symbol of empathy and foresight. Often in life, we think only of what we need for our own journey.
We focus solely on our own vision, our own struggles, and our own path. But true wisdom lies in understanding that our lives are deeply intertwined with those around us.
When we light a path for others, when we act with kindness, consideration, and care, we are also making our own journey safer and more peaceful.